Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kathleen Gibson, the Early Childhood Specialist here at PTSY. I'd like to thank each of you for joining us for this session of Therapist Thursday. Ms. Pat Kennedy joins us today to share tips on the practice of mindfulness with children, emotional awareness, and reducing anxiety, the why and the how. Ms. Pat is the director of the James Madison University Young Children's Program, and she has lots of experience educating our littlest learners and has been teaching mindfulness and resiliency to preschool children at various local child care centers for the past 7 years. We have set aside time near the end of this presentation to go over any questions you may have, and we'll actually probably go on. Pat said we can go ahead and interrupt her, so if you have any questions, we'll do that. And you can submit those questions through the chat box located in the controls near the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions that are personal in nature, we will follow up over email. We will also share a copy of this presentation as well as a number of additional resources with everyone afterwards. Welcome, Ms. Pat.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you so much. And thank you, Amanda, behind the scenes, who is going to make certain that all of this technology works for us today. Welcome, everybody, and good afternoon. I am really excited to be here to share what is a real passion of mine with you all, which is working with our youngest learners and teaching them skills and strategies and techniques to help them with their emotional awareness, self-regulation, and ways to be able to reduce their anxiety. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I do encourage you to put questions or if you have ideas and ways that you've been using mindfulness with some of your littles, drop those into the chat box, because I did tell Kathy to go ahead and feel free to interrupt me when questions pop in. We're not an overly large group, so I'd like this to be a little bit more intimate, and it's about as intimate as you can get with doing these kind of things online. My preference is face-to-face so we can have a nice dialogue and nice exchange. But unfortunately, we can't do that today. So maybe in the future, we'll all be able to meet. So what I want to do is start with you all with a little bit of a disclaimer and my why. Why am I so passionate about this work? And why have I been doing it? What got me started with this work? So I've been in education for well over 40 years, and I've been doing a meditation and mindfulness practice for myself since I was in graduate school, because it became a real need for me to be able to keep myself from burning out as I was teaching. And then it just kind of stopped. So way before those words were even, had not become quite as prevalent as they are in our vocabulary now. And it was about 7 years ago. I do a lot of adjunct teaching for James Madison University. And I was teaching a course with juniors, education majors. And we started talking about anxiety and anxiety issues. And about 75 or 80% of my class identified that they had some type of anxiety issues themselves. They were either self-diagnosed, they were on medication, they were in therapy, or it was a combination of both. And my first thought was, well, what are we doing wrong? What is missing that I have 75 or 80% of a class of 20-year-olds that are suffering from anxiety? So also about that time, I was working with my mentor in trauma-informed work, Allison Sampson Jackson. She's based out of Richmond. If any of you are around there and get an opportunity to hear her, I would highly encourage you. And we were working together on developing a training for the Early Impact Virginia, which is a consortium of home visiting programs. And it was working with her that I had my aha moment that we really need to start this work much younger. So we need to be working with children and giving our littles the tools that they need to be able to deal with the everyday stresses that they face as well. So that's pretty much what kind of started me on the let me start working with young children. When I told Allison I was going to start teaching mindfulness to 3- and 4-year-olds, she kind of laughed at me and said, yeah, good luck with that. And I've been doing it for 7 years, and it's been really has been really successful. And I've seen a lot of progress in a lot of our children, both here at the center that I'm at and in the centers that I've worked with, in behaviors, working with children that maybe have some more challenging behaviors, and then just helping some of our children who, even our littles, I've been seeing, I'll be honest with you, increase over the past 7 years with even our littles who are suffering from anxiety. So my goal today is to share a few ideas with you that hopefully you'll be able to start using tomorrow. So Maybe you're a parent, you can start using some of these. I'd encourage you to join us next week when we're going to kind of do a mindfulness class and bring your littles with you. Or maybe you're a home visitor and working with some parents or a teacher yourself. So I started with these two curriculums, Mind Up curriculum, and the information for these will be in your resources. The Mind Up curriculum is from the Goldie Hawn Foundation. I found some of their activities. Now, I'm mostly working with preschoolers, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. I have done this with children as young as 2 in family day homes. So the Mind Up curriculum, I found a lot of their activities to be a little bit more advanced and not quite developmentally appropriate for that younger age. So, but I've been able to tweak those. And then the other one is Kristen Race's Mindful Life Schools weekly program. What I really liked about her program is she had letters to parents that, both in English and Spanish, that I could kind of like tweak for the situations I was working in and then send to parents. When I first started doing this kind of work, I would go back into the classrooms and the children would have retained some of the information, but not necessarily a whole lot. They were only hearing it once a week when I was coming in. And I really started realizing that I needed to get the teachers that I was working with on board, for them to be able to see how important this was and how important it is for them too to have their own kind of practice. Once I got the teachers on board and this language became common language in their classrooms, then we really saw that the children were really retaining the information and using the strategies and techniques that they were learning. Then the next step was getting parents involved. So now we had that whole triangle. We had the parents, the teachers, and myself and the children all using the same language. And then that's when I really saw, and it makes sense to all of you who have worked with families, right? That's when I really saw that it really started taking root, when all three, pretty much surrounding the whole child with some of these techniques and language, was when it really started to get embedded in the children's language and everything. So today I'm just going to go through a couple of some of the very first activities I do. 20 minutes, 25 minutes is not a long time, but I want to give you some ideas that you might be able to just, like I said, start using this afternoon or tomorrow. So one of the very first things I do is I teach the children about their brain. I'm not a neurologist. I just know enough about the brain to teach 3 and 4-year-olds. So I usually start with the amygdala. And again, you can use different language with the children. I talk about the amygdala as, you know, it's our downstairs brain, or kind of like the alarm part of our brain, or a barking dog. Sometimes when a dog barks, there's something, right? There's something wrong. Something has gotten their attention. So I ask the children if they've ever been mad or scared, and we make mad and scared faces. I might create a little story about building something, and I built this great big block structure, and my little brother or sister comes over and knocks it over. And, you know, how would I feel with that? So then, again, the amygdala tells us when something's wrong. So we talk about that, right? So we have that part of the amygdala, and then what we're going to do is we're going to learn ways to help calm our amygdala down when our amygdala is all activated. What happens when our amygdala is all activated, our prefrontal cortex, right? That's the part of our brain that helps us make good decisions. You might call it the wise owl, the smart part of the brain, or the upstairs part of the brain. So I'll start with those, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. After a couple of times we've been chatting, I'll add the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is like a scrapbook. It helps us with our memory. So I have found that a lot of times we just don't have the appropriate expectations for our children. We think they're not going to be able to use big words like amygdala or prefrontal cortex or hippocampus. And I found quite the opposite. The children can understand the words, they can use the words. And I think learning about the brain helps them realize that there's something else going on here. They're not a bad boy or a bad girl. So to help them a little bit more to kind of understand, like this whole brain kind of piece, I use a modified, this is David Siegel's brain. It's brain in the hand model. So we talk about, we'll put both our we'll tuck our thumbs in, close our fingers over, put our hands together. We'll talk about that's our brain. It's about the size of our brain. And then we'll split our brain up, and I'll talk about how this part is our prefrontal cortex. And we remember that's the part, right? That's the wise owl. That's the part that helps us make good decisions. And when our amygdala is all fired up, we flip our lid. And you can see how far your prefrontal cortex is, right? So we have to do things to get our prefrontal cortex back online, to calm our amygdala down so we can get this back online. So real easy, just a real easy thing. Again, a visual for the children to kind of understand what's going on there. One of the very first classes I taught this in like 7 years ago, I was at a family day home provider. And she texted me about 20 minutes later and said one of her children who had a little bit more difficulty regulating his behavior got upset over something. I don't remember what it was that upset him, but he was running around the classroom going, I'm flipping my lid, I'm flipping my lid, I'm flipping my lid. I need to calm my amygdala down. So right there was an example of giving him language to be able to talk about what was going on inside of him. And another story that another provider told me one time was a little girl fell down and was crying, and one of the little boys in the class said, Mary's amygdala is on fire. We need to help her calm it down. So again, common language is really important. We'll talk about that in a little bit, about the common language. So here's just proof that children can learn the big words. This is a word wall from a classroom that I did a lot of work in, and the children would choose what words they wanted to put on their word wall. So you can see amygdala, hippocampus, and they use the term frontal lobe as opposed to prefrontal cortex. So the children I've worked with really have never had any problem learning and understanding the different parts of the brain. So I encourage you not to be afraid to use big words with children. One of the things that I do, and I'll spare you, I won't sing it for you, but if you know, for He's a Jolly Good Fellow, one of the things, as we know, right, song and music is really important to children, and it really helps them learn a variety of different concepts. So I put together this song, My Brain is Very Important, and this has really helped the children, again, to be able to just remember the different parts of the brain and what they're for. So with my older ones, with my 4 and 5-year-olds this year, and this is the first time I've done it, and it was well received as well, we actually talked about chemicals and the chemicals that are released in our brain. We call them the happy chemicals and the mad chemicals. So I'm working on another verse to this song that incorporates the name of the chemicals that are released in our brain when we're upset or worried or concerned or angry. So this will be available to you. Like Kathy said, she'll send these slides to you. So I encourage you to have fun with this song. One of the biggest things and one of the biggest advantages I've seen with working with children, and again, this is not rocket science and this is news that you all know, is when everybody's working together and using the same language. At the center that I'm at, we've worked 3 years on developing the language that we use. So when anybody interfaces with the child's hearing the exact same language. So we use a lot of resiliency language. We all use the brain language about the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. All of us learn the same techniques so that we can remind the children about the different techniques and strategies that they're using. So whoever you're working with, if you can encourage as many people who are interfacing with the child to be using the same language, again, it's going to get embedded so quickly. So after I talk to the kids about their brain and what their brain's about, and we, again, practice some of the different feelings that we have, we'll always bring in a story. There's so much good children's literature right now, and I'll be honest with you, true confession, I'm a preschool literature junkie. I really do believe that we can teach pretty much any concept through storybooks and storytelling. And I've been in this field 40 plus years, and children's literature has just gotten so much better and so much richer than it was 40 years ago when I started this journey. One of the resources that Kathy will provide for you is a book list, and hopefully that will be able to get you started on with different stories that you would be able to use and incorporate as you're working with your children. One of the other things is this becomes normal conversation, going back to that common language, that we're just using this terminology all the time. We don't try to teach a child something when they're already, right, in that rage cycle or when they're already angry. We need to be certain that we're doing a lot of these teachings of strategies and techniques when everybody's calm, cool, and collected. So we might read the story, talk about the characters, what their amygdala is doing, what may have gotten their amygdala all fired up, and then the children give advice to the main character. What is some advice that they might give them? So think about stories that you know that you could be using to help kind of do some of these concepts. So then I'm just going to kind of go through some of these strategies kind of quickly. There are lots of them you're familiar with. We make brain bottles, right? Because sometimes you just need to, your brain gets like that. You shake up that brain bottle, it's all cloudy, and that's kind of like what happens when our amygdala is all fired up. It gets like all kind of cloudy in there, and we can't make really good decisions. Sometimes we just need to sit and be quiet, and we just watch that political kind of settle back down. We do a lot of teaching of different breathing techniques, and there will be some resources for you that you can actually print out of different breathing techniques. Smell the candle, blow out the fire. So there's a variety of different techniques that we'll teach the children.
Miss Pat.
Yes.
One of the favorite ones is blowing the hot chocolate.
Oh yeah. So
don't forget.
Yeah. Thank you. So we also do. We can do seasonal ones. We can smell the flower when it's spring and summer. And in the winter time, right, you hold that hot chocolate and you smell it. It smells so good. You can smell the whipped cream. You can smell the chocolate. But it's too hot to drink. So what do we have to do? We have to blow. We have to blow that to cool that down. You guys have all seen, I'm sure, the sphere breathing and the mindful breathing, the breathing ball. I teach the children. You can see the girls with the fingers together, that if you don't have the ball, you can just do it with your fingers. When we inhale, it grows. When we exhale, it comes back in. I actually had a child call it inhale and outhale. So different kinds of breathing techniques that you can get online, and you can find gazillions of these. And we actually have the children start to invent their own, which is really kind of fun when they come in and they have their own. So this was a family day home. We were doing it outside. What a beautiful place, right? In the springtime and the summertime to do some mindfulness activities. But there's such a variety of them. Take 5, snake breathing, tummy breathing, shoulder breathing. We will, like I said, you'll have those resources available to you when we're finished. So breathing techniques are one important way that we teach, but we have to remember that breathing techniques don't necessarily work with everybody. So we try to talk about other ways that we can help calm ourselves down. We use meditation resources. The teachers use this a lot for their rest times and nap times. These are 2 of my favorite. They have children's stories for sleeping, for resting. They, right now they're free. I believe they've offered a lot because of what we're going through with COVID. A lot of these you do not have to pay for. So I would encourage you to play around with some of these and find this. They're great developmentally appropriate stories for children. We talk about how we have mindful bodies and how do we sit to have a mindful body, what makes us have a mindful body. One of the new resources I'm going to incorporate is Mind Yeti this coming year. They have a lot of free, fun videos that talk about different aspects of mindfulness, which is just a different way to be presenting the information to the children. Then we'll go through the senses. So much fun, right? To talk about mindful. Mindful is being aware with kindness, and that's what we teach the children, being aware with kindness. So we'll talk about mindful We'll talk about mindful smelling, and I'll play a little egg game with different sorts of smells. This was mindful eating. I'll be honest with you, I thought when I do this, this is going to flop. The children are not going to do this. They're not going to be, I'm going to lose their attention. And I want to say 30 minutes later, they were still like, can we do this again? Can we do this again? Can we do this again? So it's looking at the food, then smelling the food, then taking a little taste. What does it taste like? Just being really mindful and really paying attention. So we go through all the senses doing that kind of stuff. We have, this was eggs. I just take the little plastic Easter eggs, punch holes in them. I put scents in them, and then the children try to guess, right? Mindfully smell and guess what it is that they are, what they're trying to smell. We talk about mindful seeing and observing. You know, everybody can go on seeing walks or listening walks. We'll do mindful listening. So, and this really helps us. We talk about our observing eyes, right? What are we observing? What do we see? What do we see around us? That can then morph into look at your friend's face. What are you observing? What is your friend's body language telling you? So it kind of grows into that. We talk about mindful listening. I'll ring the bell, and we close our eyes, and when we can't hear it any longer, we raise our hands. Listening walks, again, just taking those different senses and just really concentrating on them and helping the children focus. This is a really nice way to focus before you do any kind of activity, is doing the mindful minute, the mindful listening. But again, like I said, we try to teach children that there's many different ways to be able to help calm ourselves down. If breathing exercises don't work, right, labeling how you feel might be the way to do it. We use mantras a lot with our children, positive self-talk. You know, I need you, you need me, just a variety of different mantras. You know, maybe you need to draw a picture, or maybe you need to just be quiet and find a quiet place to look at a book or do some moving. We talk about different ways that we can move our body that's going to help us calm our bodies down. Maybe just being with a friend is all you need. It's just talking to somebody, finding a grown-up to talk to or a friend to talk to. So we really tried to stress that there's a lot of different ways, and how do we find ways that are really beneficial for us to help us calm that amygdala down. Then moving on, after we've spent several months on that, we'll start talking about positive thoughts and negative thoughts, and how the positive thoughts are like flowers and the negative thoughts are like weeds. And we really want to keep positive thoughts, and we want to talk about positive, what are some mantras, and each of the children at the YCP might choose a mantra for themselves when they get really frustrated, something they can see. And then we also talk about kindness. This is showing that when you drop a rock in the ripples. We do a lot of work with, are you a bucket filler? Have you filled your bucket today? Are you a bucket filler or a bucket dumper? And again, that's language that we use throughout. All the teachers use it, we use it. We hear the children then using it, talking about, they'll come up to me and say, Mary helped me get my coat on today, Miss Pat. She was really a bucket filler. One of the teachers one time asked me if I would hold the door open for them, prop the door open. I said, I would love to do that for you. And one of the children said to me, Miss Pat, you just filled Miss Lauren's bucket. So it's great to be able to see the children starting to use this language. We point it out when we see it. We use it every day. We make it part of our daily routine. We role model it, and we reinforce when the children are doing it as well. And point out to them that you're really using your hippocampus to remember that this is a really good technique for somebody to use. And this last picture is one of my favorites. The mom heard her son kind of rustling around in the living room, and when she came in, he had lined up all his stuffed animals and was doing a mindfulness class with his stuffed animals, and he invited his mother to join him. So they're doing the Take 5 technique, which is just inhaling and exhaling and tracing your fingers as you do that. So like I said, that's kind of like the Reader's Digest, condensed down and dirty, how fast can Miss Pat talk version for you. There's some of the additional resources. I know Kathy has additional ones that she will be sending out that we have put together. lots of stuff out there, way more stuff now than there was 40 years ago when I started my own personal mindfulness and meditation journey. So I appreciate you guys listening. And Kathy, we have any thoughts, comments?
We do. We have one question. I didn't want to interrupt you because it didn't make sense. So
Okay.
sorry about that. Our son's in preschool and he loves doing these type of exercises with his teachers and his classmates. What do you find is the easiest way to incorporate these practices on a regular basis at home?
So if you can work it, I would say the easiest would be if you can work it into a routine. So is it, is there something that you can do right before everybody sits down to eat? Is there on weekends, are there certain routines and activities that you do that you can incorporate those? It's a great for transition. We're outside playing before we go back into the house. Let's do one of the breathing techniques. Let's take a deep breath. Let's smell that wonderful air before we go in and take all this fresh air inside with us in our lungs. So I think incorporating it into whatever your routines are, and then it just becomes a part of your routine. It's not seen as this thing we do over here separate. And I think that's what makes it really powerful for children, and it becomes a habit. It's so much easier it just becomes a healthy habit.
Getting in that muscle memory. So
yes, yeah.
Right, absolutely. One other comment was just thank you for doing this, and had bunches of exclamation points afterwards.
Well, join us.
I can't see you, so I can't show you.
Yeah, well, join us next week if you have a little, or just join us yourselves, because we're going to go through several of these. This was just kind of like a teaser to get you to join us next week with your little, and or again by yourself. And we'll go through a couple of these fun activities.
Absolutely. We did have a couple more questions that come in. So
great.
I clearly can't speak today. Is there anything we can do with 1.5-year-olds just to start building sense for mindfulness?
So yeah, that's a really great question. And thank you for asking it. I don't think they're ever too young. One of the other things is remember to model this behavior yourself, right? It's okay for you to label your feelings. I'm feeling really frustrated. I need to take a couple of deep breaths, right? Doing that self-talk. Which is really, really beneficial on so many different levels for young children. So I think, again, with our 1.5-year-olds, yeah, are they getting upset? Surely they are. Label their feelings, right? Label their feelings and breathe with them. I remember doing that with my young children, right? Was saying, you're really, really upset. I'm going to breathe with you. Now, I was doing the breathing, they weren't. But eventually, after 2 or 3, they just kind of got into the rhythm with it as well. So I would strongly encourage that self-talk, help label their feelings, and find 1 or 2 with the 1.5. You find 1 or 2 things that they seem kind of that they might, you think like, oh, they'll be interested in the take 5. They'll be interested in using their fingers, right? The breathing ball. A fun, quick little story. I had a little who I had been teaching these techniques to, and her grandmother passed away, and it was her mom's mom, and they were at the funeral, and her mom was really upset. One of the things I teach the kids is you can do buddy breathing. If you see a buddy that's upset, right? Take their hands. So this is my hand, this is Kathy's hand, and help them breathe with them. So her mom was visibly upset at the funeral, and she went over to her mom and said, Mommy, you need to buddy breathe. I'll help you. And they did this together at the funeral, right? Look at the empathy too that we're developing for children. Again, going through a lot of these, making these kinds of rituals and techniques and strategies a part of our everyday life.
Couple more questions. Do you have some time, Pat?
Sure, I do. Okay, I do.
So to respect time, I just wanted to double check with you. We have a couple more questions. I have a 4 and an 8-year-old. How do you approach 2 different age levels?
Good question. Good question. I think this kind of translates pretty well. I would try the different techniques with both of them. I think it's something that you can do at the same time, especially if you're talking about the brain stuff, so it appeals, right? The 4-year-old is going to get the brain stuff on a little different level. with the 8-year-old is going to be able to understand it a little bit more. So with the 8-year-old, you could start explaining about cortisol and dopamine and some of these other chemicals that are released in your brain when you're feeling different things. But I think the breathing techniques and some of those kinds of things translate pretty easily and differentiate pretty easily. The 8-year-old might really like to come up with some to teach the younger sibling. So, you know, you teach a few and say, okay, now you come up with some. So I think there could be a couple of different ways you might be able to approach that.
Thanks, Pat. One of my kiddos on autism, they said, that's great advice, thank you. The next question and the last one is, one of my kiddos on autism spectrum has a very difficult time using words when getting stuck, big feelings, and reacts. What is a concrete, understandable way to start teaching the basics to support body and feeling mindfulness without making it overwhelming?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. And, you know, just like all of our children, every child's individual, right? Every child has different needs. One of the things, I can share some of the experiences that I've had with one of our children that was on the spectrum. We did one. He really seemed to respond to the smell of the flower, blow out the candle. We actually had a card. The teachers actually carried it so they could kind of show him and do the visual with him. I think, you know, if you can find one that it just seems to click, it's something that they feel comfortable with, I would just kind of build on that. I'm not quite sure I answered your question. I apologize. Could you repeat the question for me, Kathy?
Sure, no problem. What is a concrete, understandable way to start teaching the basics to support body and feelings, mindfulness without making it overwhelming for their child who has ASD?
Yeah, so yeah, I would do if you're looking at techniques, something visual to have that. Again, the song, right? Pointing to the different parts of your brain and talking about the song.
And we do have picture resources that we're going to share.
Yes, yeah, the breathing cards. The breathing cards have pictures. So yeah, with all our littles, right? It's oftentimes it's let me drop this out there and see if it's a hook. And you try it, and if it's not a hook, you try something else, and eventually, hopefully, you land on something that works for them.
Thank you, Ms. Pat. I just want to remind everyone that next week we're going to do, and Pat alluded to this, but next week at 10 a.m., because we didn't want to interrupt potential nap time, we're going to do it in the morning. Ms. Pat's going to lead a fun class for the kids and parents. They can join in too if they want, to put what we learned today in action. We're going to learn some basic mindfulness techniques to do at home, and you don't want to miss it. So I'll send.
So, Kathy, I'm going to interrupt you. You do want to do it with the littles.
Oh.
So you don't want to be sitting on the couch and just.
Well, that's true too.
Right? Because, here's that way, right? Here's that way to some of those questions. How do I introduce it? Oh, let's watch this video. And then which one was your favorite? Now let's try to think about using this. When can we use this at home? I'm going to want the grown-ups up and moving as well.
Okay, grown-ups, you have to move too. So we'll learn some basic mindfulness, now I can't speak, techniques next week. I will be following up with an email with more details about that session and how to sign up, as well as all of the resources that we've talked about on today's topic. If you don't see it, check your junk or spam mail folder, because that will go out before the end of the day. I'd like to thank each of you again for joining this afternoon. Pat, thank you so much for sharing your information with us, and I wish you all a happy, healthy week.